Good evening. Welcome to this candidate forum for the 92nd Assembly District Democratic Primary Election. My name is Susan Maggiato, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of the Rivertowns. We are pleased to be partnering with Disability Rights New York tonight, which is providing both American Sign Language interpretation and live closed captioning. To see the closed captions, you can click your captions button, or perhaps you have a button with 3 dots labeled More, and then choose Captions and Show Captions. Our timekeeper tonight is Lynn Levine, a member of the Rivertowns League and a resident of Hastings. Our moderator is Sheila Burnson, and in keeping with league policy, she is not a voter in the district. Ms. Burnson is a resident of Armonk and a member of the Newcastle League, where she served as co-president. She has also served on the New York State League Board. Ms. Burnson is a retired attorney who volunteers at Pace Women's Justice Center representing victims of domestic violence. We're very pleased to have her tonight. Just a word about the League of Women Voters. I'm sure you know the League is a voter service organization, and indeed we are. That has been our mission since our founding in 1920 after women got the right to vote. But we are also an advocacy group. We lobby our legislators on public policy issues on the local, state, and national level. How do we arrive at our positions? By member study and consensus. Our positions represent the views of our members. So in that sense, we are political. However, we are staunchly nonpartisan. That means that we never support or oppose candidates or political parties. The League is fully committed to ensure compliance in principle and in practice with our National League's diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. And membership in the League is open to everyone 16 years of age or older. A word about a recording policy that both candidates have agreed to. Only the entities authorized by the League may record or live stream this forum. Only licensed media, which includes TV, radio, and newspapers, are entitled by FCC regulations to air portions of the recording. Anyone else who broadcasts or streams must do so in its entirety. This is to ensure that the content of the forum will not be manipulated in any way to create false or misleading impressions of any candidate. The forum will be recorded and available for later viewing on our League's YouTube channel, LWV Rivertowns, and the link will also be on our website and Facebook page. There's no audience participation tonight. The questions the candidates will be answering were submitted ahead of time by members of the district, either when they registered for the forum or by email to the League. A committee of League members met to review the questions, to organize them, and in some cases combine questions so we could cover as many topics as possible. And with that, I will turn the meeting over to our moderator, Ms. Burnson.
Good evening. Thank you, Susan. This is the League's favorite kind of an election, a contested one. And it's my pleasure to be here to moderate the candidate forum for the Assembly District 92 Democratic primary. There are 2 candidates running in the primary, Tom Abinanti and MaryJane Shimsky. Voting for the 92nd Assembly District Democratic primary will be on June 25th, 2024 from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. To find your polling place, please go to vote411.org. Remember, to vote in the Democratic primary, you must be a registered Democrat. Early voting will be held from Saturday, June 15th through Sunday, June 23rd at any of 25 Board of Elections locations, including the Hastings Library and the Greenberg Town Hall. To find a full listing of all early voting venues and hours, please go to the website of the Westchester County Board of Elections. It is citizenparticipation.westchestergov.com. Now I will go over the format and ground rules for this evening's forum that the candidates have learned previously and have agreed to. The format of this evening's forum is as follows. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. The candidates drew lots before the forum to determine the order of opening statements. Ms. Shimsky will open first, and Mr. Abinanti will open second. The closing statements will be given in reverse to the opening. Next, after the opening, will be the Q&A portion of this evening's forum. Questions were submitted as Susan Maggiato told you earlier, and there are no questions being allowed during this forum. The audience, neither candidate has seen the questions ahead of tonight. Each candidate has up to 2 minutes to answer each question. However, in some instances, candidates will not use their full 2 minutes. This should not be considered as either a positive or negative reflection on a candidate. In addition, each candidate has 2 rebuttals to use either during the Q&A portion or during the closing statements. Each candidate is allowed a maximum of 30 seconds for each rebuttal. There will be no responses to rebuttals. The closing statements will be in the reverse opening of the opening statements, and each candidate will have up to 2 minutes for their closing. Now let's go over a few of the ground rules that the candidates have already reviewed. Throughout the forum, comments of a personal or abusive nature will not be permitted. The moderator will rule this out of order, and civility is the order of the day. I should say order of the evening. Our timekeeper, Lynn Levine, will indicate when 30 seconds is remaining, and again will show a stop sign when the time is up. Candidates may finish their sentence, but not go beyond the stop time. Candidates may not use text messaging, email, social media, or any other form of electronic communication to or from or others during a forum. Candidates may not be coached or receive informational messages via electronic communications or on paper. Now, let's begin with opening statements. You have 2 minutes to give your opening statement. Good luck, Ms. Shimsky.
Thanks to the League of Women Voters of the Rivertowns and to all of you for watching this evening. I have lived in the Rivertowns of Hastings and Dobbs Ferry for 28 years. My husband and I raised our children here. Our communities are magical places with great schools, the beautiful Hudson River, convenient access to one of the world's great cities, and a lively and increasingly diverse culture. But our communities are currently facing serious and existential threats to our democracy, climate change and sea level rise, affordability crises affecting housing, utilities, and healthcare, threats to women's choices, women's health, and women's lives, the legitimation of bigotry and hate. In my first term as your assembly member, we've made some real progress. We're working to stabilize healthcare costs and expand mental health services. We successfully fought back against the school budget cuts that were in the executive budget. We passed laws protecting reproductive health choices after the Supreme Court's disastrous overturning of Roe versus Wade. We also passed landmark bills to fight climate change and made our communities more resilient to its effects. Most recently, the Climate Change Superfund Act that we just passed on Saturday. We passed a clean slate law, a rape is rape law, and secured more funding for higher education, childcare, Black maternal health programs, as well as fixing our crumbling infrastructure. If we go back, we know what we'll get. A politician who grandstanded about Edgemonton Corporation, but accomplished nothing for 12 years. He voted against rape is rape 9 times and introduced horrible legislation to undermine the public health by making childhood vaccinations, childhood vaccinations optional.
Okay, thank you.
We are doing better. Let's keep going.
Thank you. Mr. Abinanti.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for giving me the opportunity to speak directly to our voters and giving our voters an opportunity to see and hear us. I'm running again for the New York State Assembly because the people of Greenburgh, Mount Pleasant, and Northwest Yonkers deserve a representative in Albany who they can trust to protect them and to produce results that they need to make our community a better place to live. I'm a leader, not just a follower. I produce results, not just rhetoric. For Greenberg, this primary is about whether they will see a huge tax increase and service cuts, or whether their next assembly member will fight to reverse the special carve-out my opponent included in a new law she sponsored that lets wealthy enclave of Edgemont continue its efforts to form its own separate village. That law reformed New York's village incorporation process and immediately shut down 2 other incorporations attempted to be accomplished further north. There's also regional damage. Fewer Greenberg police, highway workers, and recreational facilities means slower mutual aid, deteriorating roads everywhere that everyone drives on, and kids hanging out with nothing to do. For Yonkers, this primary is about whether their assembly member is someone who will fight for its sufficient education aid for its school system that is facing major, major challenges. My opponent voted to cut the governor's proposed increase in Yonkers school aid by 32%. For Mount Pleasant, this primary is about whether their assembly member will direct state resources to meet the needs of our neighborhoods, like Senator Peter Harcum and I did with the Sawmill River Parkway reconstruction. And we need to save Pecanico Lake. I've helped provide government monies to save over 400 acres of parkland. As chair of the Assembly Committee on People with Disabilities, I made people with special needs a priority. They've been neglected ever since. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Abinanti. Okay, we're going to start with Ms. Shimsky. We'll take the first question. This is the second time you have faced each other in a primary election. What do you bring to the table this time that makes you the better candidate?
Well, this time I actually have 2 years of experience in the New York State Assembly. I understand the importance of building and maintaining strong relationships. Legislator, if done properly, is the most cooperative job there is. People can write all kinds of brilliant things on their computers at 2 in the morning. But what we need is to be able to count to 76. We need to be able to count to 32 in the Senate, and we need to be able to count to 1 in the governor's mansion. I passed 18 new bills in my first term, which is almost twice as much as my opponent did. But at least as important as the bills I passed were the advocacy I had for key landmark legislation, whether it was with the speaker, whether it was with program and council, whether it was in our conferences, whether it was talking with advocates in the community about what changes they wanted to see. There's an awful lot to the legislative process. And as I said, so much of it requires the ability to work effectively with other people. I am very proud of so much that I've done, some of which you can know about, some of which you cannot know about. But I made sure that I was always there for my community on these issues. And whether you're talking about climate change superfund, whether you're talking about getting rid of the copay for insulin in most cases, whether you're talking about saving the Hudson River from Holtec, all kinds of things. We worked together and we got some really great results. And I'm very, very proud of that and look forward to doing more.
Thank you. Mr. Abinanti, please.
Yes, thank you. I've had the benefit of being on the outside again for a couple of years, and to see talk to people on the street and see how alienated they are towards government. They feel that we're going in the wrong direction, and the present legislature is not doing anything to change that. Ms. Shimsky speaks about how she's got cooperative effort with the different communities. Well, that didn't happen with Greenberg. She passed a piece of legislation which could mean the destruction of Greenberg. It's legislation which on its face looks pretty good. It changes the way that we incorporate villages in the state of New York. And I was attempting to do that. And the piece of legislation that was passed with Ms. Shimsky's name as a co-sponsor was virtually the same as I had drafted and put in year after year after year. The problem was the state senator, Andrea Cousins, wouldn't do it because I wanted to make sure that it was statewide. Now, what happened was there was an exemption, one exemption for the town of Greenburgh. And so the end result is the activists in Edgemont were given a free ride to continue the efforts that they were making before to take their little pocket of money and go their own way, and in the process, leave the rest of the town of Greenburgh with higher taxes and cuts in services. That's not working cooperatively. There is a, if you recall the song Yellow Taxi, it says, you don't know what you have till it's gone. Well, I've had an awful lot of people come to me now and say, we didn't know what we had in you now until you were gone. If you take a look at what's happening with people with disabilities, I was making them a priority. I got the assembly to set up a committee on people with disabilities, and I became the chair. We passed some good legislation to help people with disabilities. We were pushing back on bad policies from OPWDD. Since I have been gone, nothing has passed of any substance in 2 years that would make the lives of people with disabilities any better.
Thank you very much.
And to speak for Greenburgh and to speak for people with disabilities.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Oh, wait. Oh, do you want to use one of your rebuttals?
I will use one of my 2 rebuttals now.
Okay, 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. I suspect there will be a question about village incorporation anyway, but there are just 2 quick points I want to make. Number 1, Mr. Abinanti is very confused. He's confusing the chapter amendments that gave Edgemont a special break with the laws that Senator Stewart Cousins and Senator Skoufis sponsored, which apply evenly and equally without fair or favor to all communities. Moreover, I am endorsed by most of the Greenburgh Town Council. I am endorsed by the Greenburgh Town Clerk and all 5 Democratic mayors in Greenburgh.
Thank you very much. Okay, that was your first rebuttal.
Yes.
So we're going on to the second question, and we're going to begin with Mr. Abinanti. This is sorry, I mangled your name.
Abinanti, it's a simple name.
Abinanti.
There you go, you got it.
Okay. When faced with a challenging legislative issue, how have you been able to bring people to your point of view? Please give a specific example.
Yes, as Ms. Shimsky said, you've got to be able to work with your colleagues. The biggest, one of the big challenges we had was that we had a piece of legislation presented to us that had a very nice name on it. But unfortunately, if you read the legislation, and I have a habit of doing that, you find that there was a problem. And that was the clean slate legislation. The sponsor of that legislation had garnered a lot of support from the business community. The problem is when you read the bill, it would have wiped out any opportunity for people with disabilities, for senior citizens, for nursing homes, for daycare centers to do any background checks. It would have even abolished the Solid Waste Commission in the county of Westchester. So I went to the sponsor and she said, too bad, we're going to pass the bill. So then I went into action. I did a memo. I rounded up the people in the suburbs who didn't like the bill. We stopped the bill. And then the next year, she met with us. We had several meetings over and over and over again. And now we were working cooperatively. And by the time I left the legislature, the bill was ready to pass. And that's the bill that Ms. Shimsky refers to. It is now a good bill. I put out a tweet and applauded the sponsor and said, this is a great bill. So you've got to be able to work with your colleagues, but you've also got to have the guts to stand up when you know that you are right and something wrong is about to happen. And that's what I did with the clean slate. I did something similar with the rape is rape bill that Ms. Shimsky keeps referring to. You know, the governor refused to sign the bill that I voted against. She refused to sign the bill. She held the bill until December 28 of 2023, forced the legislature to do an amendment in January of 2024, and did something I've never seen before in all my years. She signed both of them at the same time because she didn't want to get attacked for vetoing a bill like I'm being attacked for voting against a bad bill, but she wanted to be able to take credit for the bill, so she signed both of them together. I didn't have the luxury of doing that. I would have voted for the new bill, but not the old bill.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shimsky, if you'd like, I can repeat any question if anyone would like that.
Okay. No, I think I'm good. The crux of leadership is telling people something they don't know. And I have worked very hard to become one of the leaders in the Democratic Conference on Infrastructure Issues. I have succeeded in my advocacy, talking with my fellow legislators and lobbying with leadership to get an extra $100 million last year and this year added to the budget to give to our local governments for road repairs. I also spent a lot of time my first year getting to know my colleagues, their infrastructure issues, and urging them to sign on with a letter that was circulated by Assemblyman Chris Burdick and myself to encourage the House of Representatives to pass legislation creating a national infrastructure bank. We got well over half the conference on that letter. The other thing that just happened very recently, we finally got the Climate Change Superfund Act passed. I say finally. It was actually done in its first year. And part of the reason why is because we needed a certain amount of targeted advocacy, talking about the destruction that was already happening in our communities as a result of climate change, and how we needed help from the oil companies who caused the problem to begin with to help us repair those damages. And the last several days of the term, things got very intense. As you know, the congestion pricing in the city below 60th Street was, how did she put it, indefinitely postponed by the governor. At that point, I recognized both a problem and an opportunity. We talked a lot more about infrastructure and we got the bill done.
Thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Shimsky, you're going to begin with the next question. Please expand on the implications for the town of Greenburgh of the incorporation of Edgemont as a village.
Most likely there would be financial implications to the town of Greenburgh as a result of a prospective Edgemont incorporation. There are various scenarios. Most likely there would be a 7% cut in services across the board, with the theory that 7% of the population of Greenburgh would no longer be in unincorporated Greenburgh. They would be in the village of Edgemont. There are various best case, worst case, medium stakes case scenarios that suggest that there may be somewhere in the range of several percent of cut in resources. The town of Greenburgh would be much better off without incorporation. To tell you the truth, so would the people of Edgemont, because there's too much fiscal uncertainty on their side as well. But what we needed was the ability to have a robust process, which we never got in 12 years of Tom Abinanti. He had these grand visions of blocking Edgemont incorporation forever, these grand visions of moratorium and everything else. None of them ever passed. When those bills, which made the process more robust and which did not discriminate against Greenburgh in any way, every locality was treated the same. I said, you know, it is possible that people can attack me for not getting a full loaf for the town, but you know what? We need to do this, because if my opponent had voted for a bill like this back in 2019, the problem would be gone, and he didn't. So I moved forward. When the chapter amendments that did discriminate against Greenburgh happened, I opposed them and voted against them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Abinanti?
Yes, as a result of Ms. Shimsky's legislation, the town of Greenburgh could be devastated. She is desperately trying to confuse people. I have in front of me her bill. The bill reads fine. She's correct. It doesn't discriminate against Greenburgh. And the Greenburgh Town Board thought it didn't either. The problem is the last paragraph, which is the enactment clause, which is a very strange place to put in any kind of an exemption, includes an exemption. And it says that for village incorporation petitions that have collected signatures prior to the effective date, Nothing in this act shall deem such petition signatures invalid. So it grandfathered the petitions from Edgeron that they've been collecting for 2 years. It goes on to say village and corporation petitions that have been collected prior to this date, the commission review process, that's the guts of her bill, doesn't apply. And the old process continues. I don't know what she's talking about. If there were no chapter amendment, which was a bill that came along 6 months later, Edgemont would still be collecting their signatures under this. My whole purpose of trying to reform the law was to stop Edgemont, not stop the two villages that got stopped in Orange County and Sullivan County because of this bill, but to stop Edgemont and save Greenburgh. It's not that Greenburgh got part of a loaf. They didn't get any bread at all. Now, this is nothing new because Ms. Shimsky, back in 2017, wrote a letter to the Scarsdale Inquirer criticizing my efforts to try to stop Edgemont, criticizing the town of Greenburgh for its legal efforts to stop Edgemont, and encouraging, saying she was supporting Edgemont's efforts to do what they wanted to do. So therefore, she's consistent. All along, she has supported Edgemont over Greenburgh. That's 8,000 people who don't even live in her district, a wealthy enclave that wants to go its own way and over the rest of the town of Greenburgh that's going to be devastated by this.
Thank you very much. Mr. Abinanti, you begin with this next question. You'll be the first. The League of Women Voters strongly supports the Bigger, Better bottle bill and the packaging reduction bill. What is your position on these bills?
I support both of them. I won't take the 2 full minutes. If I were in the legislature, I would be a sponsor of both and would vote for both.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Shimsky?
I have supported both bills. I have spoken up in conference in favor of both bills. Of course, we now have to figure out, first of all, what we're going to do with the packaging bill. The degree of lobbying, corporate lobbying that went on against the packaging reduction bill was absolutely huge, comprehensive. It included almost every single type of business. And that just tells you something about how ubiquitous plastics are. A large number of us wanted to stand up to it, but we were just a couple votes short, I fear. I am hopeful that we'll be able to do some negotiations and get something better passed either in a special session or in January. Bigger, better bottle, we desperately need. First of all, a lot of redemption centers upstate are closing because of the nickel deposit as opposed to the 10-cent deposit. And it would also expand to other businesses like liquor stores. They have their valid concerns, but we can work with them and help make it better for them. So yes, we need to do these. We need to negotiate. We need to bring together the stakeholders and come up with the best possible bill and get it across the line.
Thank you. The next question, Ms. Shimsky, we're going to begin with you. Finding affordable housing in Assembly District 92 is a serious problem for many people. How would you address this issue in the Assembly? What ideas do you have to create more affordable housing while protecting both renters and landlords?
Okay. I was very disappointed that my first year in the Assembly was wasted on this issue by the back and forth over the governor's attempt to make mandatory certain targeted increases in housing. However, this year we are starting to make some movement forward. Most of this year's progress, however, was in the city. The governor does have actual financial incentives for local governments now to approve ADUs, for example, meaning accessory dwelling units in existing homes, as well as other incentives. We are working very hard to increase that list. One of the things I am most excited about, and I've been talking to the speaker a lot about, is what we're calling Mitchell-Lama 2.0, getting some affordable owner-occupied housing in our district. We have communities that would really, really welcome something like that. And if we can get some of that, that would be a very good and useful thing. In the meantime, however, we have to watch what's happening to rental costs in our community. There are mostly large developers who think it's lotto time, and they can just, people end up having to leave their apartments because they can no longer afford them. I think that some level of good cause eviction would prevent some of the abuse, especially with the large developers. We had a bill, I believe it was only applied to landlords who own 10 units or more, so the small landlords were protected. But we need something like that in the meantime while we are increasing our housing supply. It takes a lot of solutions to get this.
Thank you. Mr. Abinanti?
Yes, thank you very much. Look, housing is a human right. We've got to make sure that every human being has a decent place to live. Now, that's easy to say. We've got to accommodate the needs of other people who already have housing. And that's where the rub comes in. You've got to balance the two. So we've got to find a way to increase affordable housing so our seniors can stay in the communities they've lived in their entire lives, and our young people can stay in the community where they grew up, and our workers who work in our communities don't have to commute for miles and miles and miles. So what we have to do is look at each community and figure out the character and figure out what fits. So therefore, in some of our smaller communities, like a Pleasantville or a Dobbs Ferry or an Ardsley, there's not a lot of room to put in large development. So you use infill. You go to the downtown area and you use the mixed use. You take the stores and you entice the owners to put 2 stories of housing above. Now, that's not a lot of housing when you put it all together, but you know what? It meets some of the needs. I have long pushed for mixed use. When I was on the Greenburgh Town Board years ago, I was saying, let's use the tops of the shopping centers. So the people who live behind the shopping centers look at the front of an apartment coming out the back, and now you've used the 2 stories above a shopping center. I've also suggested that we should use office buildings, and it's something that I'd pushed for a long, long time. But you've got to get the towns and the villages to change their zoning. We did that when I was on the Greenburgh Town Board years ago. We have a Central Avenue zone in the center of Greenburgh, where housing is weighted more than commercial development. The concept of Mitchell-Lama, I've been floating that for years. I'm glad to see it's finally come to the fore where people are starting to talk about it. But you've got to suit the neighborhood. So in a place like White Plains, you can put in skyscrapers. You can't do that in our river villages. But you know what? We've got to all get together and help a place like White Plains, New Rochelle, Yonkers, and in Greenburgh will take some also. Help them get the housing that they want to have built in their communities to meet the regional needs.
Thank you very much. The next question, we're going to begin again with Mr. Abinanti. Other than issues that have already been addressed, what are the most important challenges facing, your district, and how do you propose to address them?
I think affordability is the most important issue that's facing our residents. People want to stay here, they want to live here, but they're finding more and more the taxes are too high, and the cost of living is too high, and that increases the taxes, which then that increases the cost of living, and it's a spiral that goes on and on and on. I've already taken many steps to try to help reduce the cost of taxes. I had to pass 3 times because Governor Cuomo vetoed it twice, but I got it done the 3rd time. Legislation that allows the town of Greenburgh and the town of Mount Pleasant and all of their villages to impose a small hotel tax. That's a room fee, basically on out-of-towners. That brings into the town of Greenburgh about $1 million a year that would otherwise be property tax monies. I also passed legislation that increased the ceiling for on income for senior citizens and people with disabilities to qualify for their the exemption. I was proud to vote for a change in the tax law so that you can now write off part of a circuit breaker. So depending on your income, you can deduct a certain amount off of your income tax of your property tax. I also, it's interesting. Ms. Shimsky talks about we. I voted for an awful lot of stuff that other people did. But I also contributed. There was a value added. I'm talking about the bills that I actually drafted and that I actually passed. One that I'm very proud of that came from the community to help those who have much lower incomes is to require supermarkets to take their surplus food, their excess food, and give it to food banks that want to take it. So that helps the other end of our society. But I think affordability is the real problem, and we've got to take a look at how do we hold down the costs and make our communities more affordable for everyone.
Thank you. Ms. Shimsky?
Thank you. Affordability is very important. We already discussed housing some, but what we are getting in our office at this point are really large numbers of complaints about utility bills, especially Con Ed. There have been large spikes, and many of these, we're not hearing from the people who own the big houses. We're hearing from the people who live in the apartments, which means that our middle class is getting further hurt. And if you want to know why the middle class and working class people are leaving New York State, it's not because of taxes. It's because of lack of affordable housing. And utilities obviously feed into that as well. We haven't talked about public health yet, and we have some serious challenges ahead of us, one of which is the proliferation of vaccination misinformation. There are still people who believe that the MMR vaccine causes autism, for example. We have a lot of misinformation coming from foreign governments on Facebook and these governments don't want us to be healthy people. Let's just put it that way. We also have a Black maternal health crisis where the Black maternal fatality rates are somewhere around triple that of white mothers. We also have a lot of problems with stillbirths as well. We have started to move forward. And yes, I unashamedly use the word we, to do more to bring doulas into the process to act as advocates for pregnant women, laboring women, and their babies. Government efficiency. One of the things I'm looking toward is making as much of our government as electronically driven as possible within any serious constitutional limits.
Thank you very much. Okay. Ms. Shimsky, we're going to start with you with the next question. New Yorkers will likely be voting on an equal rights amendment to the state constitution in November. Do you support this amendment, and why or why not?
I support the amendment. We are facing a serious problem here in New York because the United States Supreme Court is putting rights of all kinds of people at risk. We know when they actually issue their opinions reversing Roe versus Wade, and comments that have been made in public since and in opinions since. They're not just looking at ending abortion. They are looking at ending birth control. They are looking at ending gender affirming health care. They are looking at all kinds of issues. We also have, and one of the things that does is the Equal Rights Amendment is it bars discrimination against pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes. It bars discrimination against people for their sexual orientation or expression. It also hammers down, which is going to be important because we don't know what the Supreme Court is capable of, to bar discrimination against people for all of the basic reasons that we've thought of for generations, whether it's racial discrimination, religious discrimination, and so on. We need to make sure that we protect our people as much as we possibly can. We have lots of statutory law. We have lots of case law in the state that does that. But the strongest thing we can do to protect our people is a constitutional amendment. And I say, given what's going on outside of New York's borders, we have to do it. So I am definitely in favor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Abinanti, please.
Yes, everybody should be treated equally under the law. And that's what the Equal Rights Amendment is designed to do. I was there for the first passage. In fact, I introduced two of my own bills to protect bodily autonomy for women and everyone else, and to protect people against discrimination on the basis of disability. I've lobbied very hard as the chair of the Committee on People with Disability to make sure language is in that Equal Rights Amendment to protect people against discrimination on the basis of disability. So I am very strongly in favor of this. I had the privilege of voting for it on its first passage. You know, I was the attorney for the Westchester Coalition for Legal Abortion for 18 years. I was one of the first board members on the corporation of WCLA way back when. And I got to hear the stories over and over and over again about women who went to the back alleys with coat hangers. I became an advocate for women's reproductive freedom very, very early, well before it was a popular thing to talk about. I remember going into a room where the person we were trying to convince looked at us, and I think I was the only man in the room, and he says, well, I come from an Italian conservative family, and how could I possibly come over and be pro-choice? And I looked at him and said, are you looking at me? Where do you think I come from? Get educated, learn what's going on, and understand. Eventually, he became pro-choice. He was an important public figure. He eventually became pro-choice. You know, and so I voted for every one of the bills that came up to put the Roe versus Wade language in our statute, and several other bills. I'm disappointed that the courts so far have knocked it off the ballot because of a technical error. I don't know how that error occurred. I got an opinion from the Attorney General on my two proposed constitutional amendments, and I don't understand how it slipped through the leadership, but I don't think that is a fatal error. I believe eventually the Court of Appeals will find that is not a fatal error, and we will get a chance to vote on this November.
Okay, the next question, I'm going to begin with Mr. Abinanti. New York has been in the forefront in providing support for people with disabilities. How would you continue this work, and what more needs to be done?
Wow. People with disabilities deserve the same rights as everyone else. We all have some type of a disability. We need to stress abilities. Every time I walk up to a microphone, I'm only about 5'3", and the microphone is usually up here. And I jokingly pull the microphone down and say, you know, that big guy has a disability. He's way too tall. But I'm trying to make the point that you've got to take people for what they can contribute, not for what they look like or how somebody terms them. When I was the chair of the People with Disabilities Committee, we passed all kinds of, I've got a whole list of things that we passed. Unfortunately, no serious legislation has come out of the Assembly in the last 2 years. I would address housing and allow for parents and family members to build housing for their own family member. OPWDD right now prohibits that. I passed a bill in the Assembly. It never went through the Senate, and it hasn't even seen, it never even saw the light of day in the last 2 years, even though the chair of the committee was carrying the bill. And I thank Ms. Shimsky for being a sponsor of that bill, but it never came out. It never happened. You know, cooperation is good, but you have to have spark plugs. You got to have somebody who's going to make something happen. And that's what I did when I was there. And we're talking about employment. What is it, like 90% of the people with autism are unemployed in the state of New York? And if you take a look at services, OPWDD is pushing back, trying to take services away. Where there's a lack of services, parents have found alternatives. They go to community classes, and now OPWDD is scrutinizing the classes. They want people with disabilities to go to programs for people with disabilities. That's the height of segregation. That's the height of discrimination. There are a lot of good people in Albany. They want to help. They just don't know what to do. So when I go back there, I will continue the leadership that I was providing when I was in the legislature.
Thank you. Ms. Shimsky?
Thank you. I'm glad that my opponent mentioned the issue of employment for people with disabilities, because that has been the primary focus of the New York State Assembly this year. Now, a number of those bills have created various commissions to study the issue and make recommendations. Of course, there are people who may know a lot already and don't believe there's any need for such a thing. But the way you bring people along is you generate the information, and then you have something to work with. You have something to present to them. We've had some really good spark plugs on this issue of disabilities, especially employment related issues for people with disabilities. Rebecca Seawright has actually done a good job as chair. We have also had several other members, including locally our own Chris Burdick. We are moving forward. We are making sure that people with disabilities are able to contribute to their society. And housing undoubtedly will have to be the next one that we really put laser focus on in the next term, because just as we all are having problems, people with disabilities have problems, and the real fear that the parents have is what's going to happen when they're gone. And we do need to do more with that. And there have been discussions beginning on that already. So I look forward to some real quality legislation next year and the following year.
Thank you. Ms. Shimsky, we're going to begin with you for the next question. If you could prioritize one piece of election reform in New York State, what would it be?
You know, there are so many different directions one can go in this because there are so many different issues. We have done a lot this term to make it more convenient for people to vote, which is a very good thing. We've made it easier for them. Well, we have legislation, we're awaiting the governor's signature on it to make it easier for people to cure defects when they do a written ballot. I think that now what we really have to do is ensure that our voting machines are backed up and transparent enough that people have a lot of faith in their accuracy. A lot of people don't. And I think the way you do that is you make sure you have a paper trail, and that the mechanisms within the machines that scan those are beyond reproach. We do have legislation on that, which has not made it out of the elections committee for a number of years. I know that there are a lot of local advocates here who have been fighting the good fight on that issue. And I don't want to wait until we have that disastrous election before we have to go back to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Abinanti?
The integrity of our election system must be protected. Any Democrat that talks about protecting the integrity gets challenged because Donald Trump has made such a big deal over his supposed victory and over supposed problems around the country. Those are imaginary problems. And we haven't had any problems in New York yet, thank God, because we've had a system of checks and balances. But we cannot possibly allow the use of computerized machines that do not print a ballot for a person to read and put into a box. And right now, there is a big push to have machines that look like, the ATM machines, but there's no ballot that is produced. And I know Amy Paulin, I believe, has a bill to make sure that the voting machines are produce a paper ballot so that the voter can see, either check it off himself or herself, or can see how it gets printed by the machine and make sure it reflects their ballot. I have been involved in this for a long time. I'm an election lawyer. I was involved in one case where there was a shortage of votes in the city of White Plains, but we had the lever machines, and we were able to open up the back of the machine and see where it got stuck. You can't do that with a computerized system. So we've got to make sure that we count every vote, and we have to have a system that makes sure that we count every vote. When I was a Westchester County legislator, there was a 16-to-1 vote. I was the one no on a bond act. Why? Because the county Board of Elections wanted to buy some machines that I thought, along with many advocates, were not the type, not verifiable. And so I stood up and I went against the majority and I said, no, this is a bad idea. And frankly, I don't think those machines have ever been used. But at any rate, I think the integrity of the system is very important. That to me is the most important part of election reform.
Thank you very much. Mr. Abinanti, we're going to begin with you for the next question. A medical aid in dying bill was first introduced a decade ago, but has yet to reach the floor for a vote. What is your position on this bill?
I believe everyone has a right to control their own body. And if you take that a little bit further, I believe that that means a person who is in serious pain and is facing imminent death should be able to seek help from a doctor and get assistance in dying. So I support the medical aid in dying bill. As an advocate for people with disabilities, I've gotten pushback from the community, and I have been asked by some of the advocates for this bill to lobby my friends in the disability community. And I've looked at the bill carefully. I think we can make a few improvements to allay their fears, but by and large, I think it's a good bill. And I think the fears of the disability community that somehow this is going to be used to extinguish the life of people with disabilities, I think that is not within the bill, within the realm of the bill. You know, I'm an attorney. I had the opportunity to get called, an unfortunate situation, to do a will for someone. They were in very serious pain. I had to go in the morning because they were in the palliative care. I had to go in the morning before they got their medications because they had to be lucid when I spoke with them. So I spoke with them, got there, and the nurse immediately came in and gave her morphine. I then went out, did the will. A couple of days later, I had to do the same thing in the morning. I had to get there early before she got her morphine, but she was in such pain. It was really painful to see. Completed the will, she died a week later. She's a prime case for a person who should have the opportunity to die with dignity.
Thank you. Ms. Shimsky?
Yes, I am a proud co-sponsor of Assemblywoman Paulin's bill. It's interesting, the opinion polling on real people and not elected officials shows that there are large majorities in favor of this. And unlike most issues we deal with these days, there's a very small partisan divide on it. And the reason why is because so many of us have had real life experiences with watching our loved ones die. And we see that there is often something very wrong in the way our healthcare system has been conceptualized to deal with people who are dying, who are increasingly losing their ability to function, whether intellectually, whether physically, whether in terms of being able to cope with the kind of pain and discomforts that their particular disease or mix of diseases is causing. And sometimes when I hear my colleagues talk about the bill, I don't know if we're talking about the same bill at all. As my opponent pointed out, there have been several layers of safeguards added to these bills, to the bills over the years. And we've had recent safeguards added to the Paulin bill this year. Now, there are 10 states, I believe it's 10 states and the District of Columbia, not 9 states and the District of Columbia, some of which are very populous states that already have aid in dying. No problems have come to light with any of this. And our safeguards are far and away the most rigorous safeguards anywhere. So I think this is so important to achieve the humanity we want us all to have.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Shimsky. I think this is going to be the final question of the evening. And we start again with Ms. Shimsky. There is a heightened awareness of disparity among citizens in accessing healthcare. How can this be addressed on the state level?
Okay, we do have several options. We do have some fine programs now which can be expanded. We also have the ability under Care for All legislation to get federal subsidies to pay for New Yorkers' healthcare. Those New Yorkers who cannot qualify for health insurance because of immigration status or other reasons. We also have the New York Health Act, which would create a single payer healthcare system. Ultimately, if we want to have quality healthcare for all in this country, we're going to have to do that. The question is always, is this the time? What are the specific ramifications of this particular bill? I think we need some intensive study. But if we can make it work financially and make it make sense financially, and it's easy to say that 30-some-odd% of our healthcare costs, of course, end up going to people who do not provide healthcare. But making sure that that 30-some-odd% gets to the healthcare and doesn't end up going to corporate interests or something else is another critical thing that we have to make sure that we have a handle on. I am hopeful, however, that in my time in the New York State Assembly, we will eventually get that bill passed.
Thank you. Mr. Abinanti, sorry.
Abinanti, there we go. That's
Mr.
okay. Just call me
Abinanti.
Tom, okay? That's a lot easier.
Mr. Abinanti.
Okay, thank you. Look, like I said, housing was a human right, so is healthcare. You know, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. I was a very proud sponsor of the New York Health Act when I was in the legislature. That's Medicaid for all. And I know there are objections by some of the unions, but I think with some serious negotiation, we need a governor to take charge of this and sit down, knock some heads together and say, okay, guys, how are we going to get this done? There are too many people out there who need the healthcare and are not getting it. And healthcare is too expensive the way we're doing it. Right now, we have big hospital conglomerates that are coming into each community and forcing doctors to join in their networks. In the beginning, doctors were afraid that Medicaid for all would force them into some kind of a plan that they don't want to be in. Well, you know what? They're now in private plans that they don't want to be in. They'd be better off in a plan where they're funded by the New York Health Act. People with disability are a perfect example of people who can't get health care. Doctors don't take Medicaid, at least not here in Westchester County. We cannot find a psychiatrist who takes Medicaid. So right now, the state is wasting millions of dollars looking at managed care. And the parents are saying, we don't need managed care. We know what needs to be done. We don't need more management. We need more care. And the same goes for so many other parts of our community. Poorer people, even middle-class people, can't afford healthcare because they can't afford the insurance. So we really need a change in the system. And we really need to have something like the New York Health Act passed as quickly as possible. I don't see a need for another study, too many studies. Ms. Shimsky keeps talking about studies. We know what has to be done. We've had study after study after study, and we know what has to be done in the healthcare area. We just don't have the will to do it. There's too much money pushing back against it from the big hospitals and from other entities in the medical system that are making a lot of money out of our present system and depriving people of money that could be used for their healthcare.
Thank you. Now we've come to the end of this forum. Where each candidate will give a closing statement of 2 minutes. They have 2 minutes for their closing statement. We're going to begin with Mr. Abinanti.
Okay, again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters. This election is about whether Greenburgh will have an assembly member who feels their pain, because Edgemont is still pursuing a separate village thanks to the Shimsky exemption. And they want an assembly member who will fight with them to save Greenburgh, as I will. It's also about whether Northwest Yonkers will have an assembly member who will fight to save Yonkers schools, as I will, or Ms. Shimsky, who reportedly did not even show up for a meeting with the mayor when he asked for one to talk about the fact that the money that the assembly had put in the budget and ultimately they voted for was insufficient. It's about whether Sleepy Hollow and Pleasantville and Hawthorne and Thornwood and Valhalla will have an assembly member who understands their unique perspectives as I do, and who will fight to save Mechanical Lake. It's about whether we'll have an assembly member who understands state roads and flooding are worse than ever. As Shimsky talks about all the money that went into the budget, how much are going to come back to our district? Very little. It's about Con Ed rates that are exorbitant. It's about our community becoming unaffordable. And it's about having someone who not just follows the lead of the leadership or the Democratic Party, but has the experience and the know-how how to do something about it, like me. Or somebody like Ms. Shimsky, who just claims credit for all of the things that other people have done. It's about it's about whether we will have an assembly member who knows the need to enhance public safety, who knows how to pass legislation to reduce gun violence like I did. And it's not about something like Ms. Shimsky, who's sponsoring a bill right now to reduce sentences and let violent convicted felons out of prison sooner than they've been sentenced to. And it's about some of our most vulnerable, about our often forgotten citizens, people with disabilities. You know, on the street at Hastings Pride on Friday, a gentleman stopped me, and he said he was going to vote for me because of a text from his friend. The text relayed a conversation with a legislator who was asked why.
Mr. Abinanti, I'm afraid you've gone over.
Let me just finish the last line.
Okay.
He got a text when asked why there was no legislation moving for people with disabilities. I was stunned by his response. The legislator said, because Abinanti is no longer here.
Thank you. Ms. Shimsky, you have 2 minutes for your closing. You're muted.
Thank you very much to the League for sponsoring this event. Thank you very much to our visiting moderator, and thank you very much to all of you at home who are watching. There is a lot that has to be done. It's not going to all be done in 2 years, but here's what I want to say. Every time Mr. Abinanti says, well, this isn't done, this isn't done, this isn't done, remember, he had 12 years to do it. And so much of it, everything he said, he was not able to do in 12 years. Now, in 2 years, we have done an awful lot. And I know he doesn't like the word we, but working together is how you get the major legislation passed, or you end up like Mr. Abinanti, who has all these great bills which end up going nowhere. Now, as I said, in my first term, I passed 18 bills, which is close to twice as much as if Mr. Abinanti did in his first term. Many of them dealt with things like government efficiency. Many of them were local bills because there was a lot of unmet demand at that point. In terms of gun violence, one of the things that I was very helpful on was the Westchester County needed to get authorization to increase the cost of their pistol license permits. Mr. Abinanti had been blocking that for years. My being elected made sure that our county could make sure pistol permit investigations are financially sustainable. In terms of leaving criminals out, I think he's referring to my sponsorship of elder parole, which entitles older inmates who have been in jail for a certain amount of time a hearing. Not an open door, a hearing to see if they've earned it. And in terms of,
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
I'd like to use my rebuttal, if I may.
Yes, you may. 30 seconds, Mr. Abinanti.
Yes, first of all, I passed 157 bills when I was in the legislature. And the things that Ms. Shimsky is saying, that all the stuff I'm talking about that I didn't do, that's not true. I did a lot of them. I could go down those bills, but we don't have the time. Okay, but there are new things that need to be done. And those are the things that I would take on. As far as the pistol license, she's attacking me this. She said you have to work with people. I got a change in Westchester's law to do away with permanent gun licenses by promising, in exchange for that, with the state Senate, that we would never change the process on how you fix the fees. So I honor my commitment.
Thank you very much.
In exchange for that, I got to change.
Thank you very much.
In Westchester law.
Thank you. Okay. That concludes the forum this evening. Thank you to both the candidates and thank you to the audience. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. We encourage everyone to vote. Have a good evening.
Thank you all.